December 28, 1941. Leningrad, the pencil trembles in her hand. 11-year-old Tanya Savicheva hunches over a small notebook, the only one her family hadn't burned for fuel. Her breath clouds the frozen air inside the apartment. Outside, artillery shells whistle and crack against the city's bones. She writes 6 words in Russian. Zhenya died on December 28th. Her sister is gone. It's been for months since the Germans closed the ring. For months since the last road out disappeared behind enemy lines. And this is just the beginning. Before Tanya's diary ends, she will record 6 more deaths. Before the siege breaks, nearly 1 million souls will vanish from Leningrad's streets. And before the world fully understands what happened here, this frozen city on the edge of the Baltic will become the site of the most lethal siege in human history. This is the story of 872 days that should never be forgotten. This is the story of the 900-day siege, September 8, 1941. The date means nothing to most people now, but in Leningrad, it marks the day the world went dark. German Army Group North reached the suburbs of Leningrad in August 1941, and by September 8th, land routes from the city to the rest of the Soviet Union were completely cut off. 3 million people, soldiers, factory workers, children, grandmothers, found themselves trapped inside a city that was about to become a tomb. But to understand why Hitler wanted this city so badly, you have to understand what Leningrad meant. Peter the Great founded the city in 1703 as St. Petersburg, window to the west, where the Neva River meets the Gulf of Finland. For centuries, it served as Russia's imperial capital. It was where the Romanov Tsars built their gilded palaces, where Tchaikovsky composed, where Dostoevsky wrote. As the capital of Tsarist Russia, the site of the 1917 Bolshevik Revolution, and as an incarnation of the Russian nation, Leningrad carried clear significance for Adolf Hitler. He wanted it destroyed, not captured. Destroyed. Hitler's intentions were spelled out in chilling detail. Nazi official Franz Six told German military officials, eastward of this line, a blazing strip will emerge in which all life is to be erased. It is intended to decimate about 30 million Russians through starvation. Leningrad was to be razed to the ground, and then came the threat that would seal the city's fate. All those involved in this operation are forbidden on pain of death to give a Russian even a piece of bread. This wasn't war. It was annihilation by hunger. The siege began with fire. On September 8, 1941, a Luftwaffe incendiary attack caused raging fires that destroyed vital supplies of oil and food. Massive clouds of black smoke rose over the city, visible for miles. Citizens stood watching, their faces ash white, knowing that what burned in those warehouses was their future. The Germans bombed bridges, houses, and shops instead of large buildings, which served as reference points during air raids. By bombing houses, they more directly impacted innocent civilians, who were now left homeless and without any possessions. An even bigger raid followed on September 19th, when the Luftwaffe unleashed 2,500 high-explosive and incendiary bombs. All told, an estimated 75,000 bombs were dropped on the city over the course of the blockade. But Hitler knew something more effective than bombs. He knew hunger. By early November, food shortages had seen civilian rations cut to just 250 grams of bread a day for workers. For the elderly, the unemployed, the children, those deemed non-essential, it was even less. The daily ration for civilians was reduced to 125 grams of bread, no more than a thick slice, and the bread itself. It was often made from ersatz substances like cellulose, hardly nutritious fare. Imagine trying to survive on 2 thin slices of sawdust bread per day. Then winter arrived. Starvation set in by December, followed by the coldest winter in decades, with temperatures falling to -40 degrees Fahrenheit. No heat, no electricity, no escape. People worked through the winter in makeshift armament factories without roofs, building the weapons that kept the Germans just short of victory. The city became a landscape of the dead. Back in the Savicheva apartment, Tanya watched her family disappear. She was the youngest of 5 children. Her father had died when she was 6, leaving her mother Maria her siblings Zhenya, Nina, Mikhail, and Liko, and two uncles. When the siege began, they all stayed to help the war effort. Maria sewed uniforms. Liko worked at the Admiralty shipyard. Zhenya worked at a munitions factory. Nina helped build city defenses. Her uncles served in anti-aircraft defense. Tanya, just 11 years old, dug trenches and put out firebombs, but by December, something was happening to them all. Their bodies were consuming themselves. Skin stretched thin over bone. Eyes sank deep into skulls. Hair fell out in clumps. People became unrecognizable. Looking in the mirror for the first time in a while led to shock and disgust. The person staring back looked like a monster. Tanya had kept a real diary before a large, thick notebook, but the family had burned it for fuel when there was nothing left to heat the stove. All she had now was a small notebook that belonged to her sister Nina. And in that notebook, organized alphabetically by the Russian alphabet, Tanya began recording something no child should ever have to write. December 28, 1941, Zhenya died. Zhenya worked at an arms plant, battling harsh winter elements. She became the first victim due to high physical demands and a lack of nutrition. January 25, 1942, grandmother died at 3 o'clock. March 17, 1942, Lika died at 5 o'clock in the morning. Lika had been a promising engineer and talented musician. He worked long shifts at the Admiralty shipyard, often working a second shift into the night. He died in the shipyard's hospital, April 13, 1942. Uncle Vasya died. Vasya was 56 years old. He had served in World War I, but was refused this time on account of his age. Uncle Vasya and Tanya had been very close. May 10, 1942, Uncle Lisha died. May 13, 1942, Mama died. When Tanya wrote about her mother's death, she skipped the word died. Perhaps it was too much. Perhaps there were no words left. Then came the final two entries, the ones that would echo through history. The Savichevs are dead. Everyone is dead. Only Tanya is left. What Tanya didn't know was that her older sister Nina had actually survived, evacuated across Lake Ladoga at a moment's notice, and her brother Mikhail had left before the siege to join the partisans. But Tanya believed she was alone. She was 11 years old, surrounded by corpses, in a city eating itself alive. What Tanya experienced was not unique. It was typical. Estimates suggest between 800,000 to 1.5 million people died during the siege, with most dying from starvation, exposure, disease, and shelling. More than 1,100,000 Soviet forces and approximately 40,000 civilians died during the winter of 1941-42. Alone. Victor Davis Hansen affirmed that more than 1 million died at Leningrad amid mass starvation, epidemic, cannibalism, and daily barrages, a greater death toll than any siege in history. Let that sink in. These figures associated with the defense of a single city are 6 times greater than the United States' total death toll during the entirety of World War II. Inside the city, people ate anything they could find: pets, livestock, birds, vermin, all consumed. One teenage diarist, Lena Mukina, wrote, "Today, we had delicious soup with meat and macaroni. The cat meat will be enough for 2 more meals. It would be good to get hold of another cat somewhere." When the animals were gone, people turned to desperate measures. Melted sugar from destroyed warehouses had flowed through floors into surrounding soil. Desperate citizens began digging up frozen earth to extract the sugar. This soil was sold in the Haymarket to housewives who tried to separate the sugar or simply mixed it with flour. They boiled leather belts. They scraped wallpaper paste, which contained potato starch. They ground down carpenter's glue, and then the thing no one wanted to speak about, reports of cannibalism appeared in the winter of 1941-42. After all birds, rats, and pets had been eaten, hungry gangs attacked and ate people. The authorities eventually arrested over 2,000 people for cannibalism. There are as many as 1,500 documented cases of cannibalism throughout the siege. A special police unit was formed just to combat it. Bodies lay everywhere. People transported the remains of dead relatives on sleds along Nevsky Prospect, the city's grand boulevard, now a frozen highway of corpses. Many unregistered people died in air raids and from starvation while trying to escape. Their bodies never buried or counted. Piskuyevskoy Memorial Cemetery in Leningrad holds 500,000 civilian victims of the siege alone. 500,000 in one cemetery. Yet somehow, impossibly, Leningrad refused to surrender. The only connection to the outside world was Lake Ladoga, a massive body of water on the city's northeastern edge. In summer, food and fuel arrived in barges. In winter, after the lake froze, supplies came in trucks and sleds. Across the ice, this route was officially called Military Road No. 101, but locals called it the Street of Life. It was anything but safe. Russians risked their lives driving across thin ice to smuggle food and supplies into the city. Despite the dangers of melting ice, they continued to drive over the frozen lake surface even in warmer weather. German planes bombed the trucks. The ice cracked beneath the weight. Vehicles plunged into the freezing water, drivers and cargo vanishing beneath black waves, but they kept going. In early 1942, the Soviets evacuated some 500,000 civilians across the Road of Life, reducing the starvation-ravaged population to a more manageable 1 million. Tanya Savicheva was among them. In August 1942, a train carrying children arrived in the village of Shotki, and Tanya ended up in orphanage No. 48, but she was already dying. Savicheva was evacuated, but eventually died from tuberculosis on July 1, 1944, at the age of 14. Never seeing the liberation she'd survived for, she died before the siege even ended. She died before victory. She died having witnessed the annihilation of her entire family, but her diary survived. Here's what makes the Siege of Leningrad even more extraordinary. The city didn't just survive. It fought back while people were starving, while bodies froze in the streets, while mothers were burying children. Leningrad kept producing weapons, factory workers. By the end, nearly 80% women were producing huge amounts of machinery and ammunition. Students continued studying. Artists continued creating, and on August 9, 1942, something remarkable happened. Composer Dmitri Shostakovich's 7th Leningrad Symphony was performed. A concert broadcast over loudspeakers pointed toward the enemy lines. The score had passed through German lines by air one night in March. During another performance of Tchaikovsky's 5th Symphony, bombs started to fall nearby during the second movement. The orchestra never stopped playing and continued to the last note. This was psychological warfare in reverse. The message was clear: you cannot break us. Poet Olga Bergholz became the voice of the siege, working throughout the blockade at the only radio station still in operation. In her calm, reassuring voice, she read poems and provided updates, giving her fellow Leningraders something resembling hope. She wrote, "To have survived this blockade's fetters, death daily hovering above, what strength we have needed, neighbor, what hate we've needed, and what love." And perhaps most astoundingly, Soviet scientists at the Institute of Plant Industry, surrounded by tons of edible seeds and crops, chose to starve to death rather than consume the world's first seed bank, which they believed represented the future of Russia. 9 scientists died protecting those seeds. They died protecting tomorrow, while living through hell today. In January 1943, Red Army soldiers broke through the German line, rupturing the blockade and creating a more efficient supply route along the shores of Lake Ladoga. For the first time in over a year, Leningrad could breathe. Engineers built a special railway link, and by the end of the year, nearly 5 million tons of food and supplies had been shuttled into Leningrad. The city sprang back to life. Gardens were planted in every available space: parks, courtyards, boulevards. Women worked in factories. Children returned to school. The dead were finally buried properly, but the siege wasn't over. The Germans still surrounded the city. The shelling continued. It would take one final massive offensive. In early 1944, the Red Army mobilized some 1.5 million men and 1,600 tanks in an offensive that overran the German lines. Like dominoes, the Wehrmacht positions collapsed. Army Group North was pushed into full retreat. And then, finally, after 872 days after nearly 2.5 years of unimaginable suffering, it ended on January 27, 1944. After nearly 900 days under blockade, Leningrad was freed. The victory was heralded with a 24-salvo salute from the city's guns, and civilians broke into spontaneous celebrations in the streets. The blockade of Leningrad was lifted on January 27, 1944, but the war raged on for over a year as Soviet soldiers marched toward Berlin. The numbers are almost incomprehensible. The 872 days of siege resulted in the deaths of up to 1,500,000 soldiers and civilians. Of a pre-war population of 3.5 million, only 700,000 people were left alive. Of Leningrad's 2.5 million inhabitants on the eve of the conflict, only 600,000 were still alive in the city when it was liberated, with around 1 million having been evacuated before and during the siege. Do the math. That means roughly 2 million people either died or were evacuated under horrific conditions. Nearly 2/3 of the city's population gone. The Siege of Leningrad killed an estimated 800,000 civilians, nearly as many as all the World War II deaths of the United States and the United Kingdom combined. Some historians have classified it as a genocide due to the intentional destruction of the city and the systematic starvation of its civilian population. Hitler wanted to erase Leningrad from existence. He wanted to starve every man, woman, and child. He wanted it to serve as an example, a demonstration of what happened to cities that resisted the Third Reich. He failed. Remember Tanya Savicheva, the 11-year-old girl with the small notebook? After the war, Tanya's sister Nina returned to Leningrad and discovered the diary. She published it, and Tanya became a symbol of the siege. Tanya's diary is now displayed at the Museum of Leningrad History, with a copy at the Piskaryovskoye Memorial Cemetery. According to some accounts, it was presented during the Nuremberg trials as evidence of Nazi crimes, though this remains disputed. Today, in St. Petersburg, the city's regional name, restored after the Soviet Union's collapse, the celebration of May 9th, Victory Day, still begins at Piskaryovskoye Memorial Cemetery with a tribute to the dead of the blockade. Visitors bring flowers to the mass graves, but some bring something else: loaves of bread. They lay bread on the graves in sad remembrance of what brought those victims to their deaths, because of the heroism of its inhabitants who refused to submit despite unendurable conditions. Leningrad became the first Soviet city to receive the Hero City Award in 1945. But here's what haunts me most about this story: Tanya's final entry. Only Tanya is left, except she wasn't. Her sister Nina survived. Her brother Mikhail survived, fighting with the partisans until 1944. They returned to find Tanya gone, having died believing she was utterly alone in the world. That's the cruelty of it. The unnecessary, crushing cruelty. She survived the siege. She was evacuated. She made it to safety. And then she died anyway. Her body to broken, her spirit to shattered. Her childhood to thoroughly stolen to ever recover when the siege ended. The New York Times wrote, "There is hardly a parallel in history for the endurance of so many people over so long a time. Leningrad stood alone against the might of Germany. It is a city saved by its own will, and its stand will live in the annals as a kind of heroic myth." But it wasn't a myth. It was real. Unimaginably, horrifically real. The Siege of Leningrad was the most terrible incident of World War II, not because of a single bomb or a single battle, but because of 872 days of calculated, systematic, intentional starvation of an entire city. It was genocide by hunger. It was the weaponization of winter itself, and yet, impossibly, the city survived not because of tanks or planes or superior strategy, but because ordinary people, bakers and seamstresses, engineers and musicians, children who should have been playing instead of digging trenches, decided that surrender was unthinkable. That even if they died, they would die on their feet. By the end of the siege, Leningrad had become an empty ghost city with thousands of ruined and abandoned homes. But it wasn't empty of spirit. It wasn't empty of memory. Today, When you walk through St. Petersburg, you're walking over the graves of a million souls. The beautiful palaces have been restored. The Hermitage Museum gleams again. The Neva River flows as it always has, but if you listen really, listen, you can still hear it. The scratch of Tanya's pencil in that frozen apartment, the footsteps of those who carried loved ones through the snow, the symphony that played while bombs fell off the city that refused to die. We remember not to glorify war or suffering. We remember because forgetting would be the final death, the one that erases not just bodies, but meaning. Tanya Savicheva wrote 9 entries in a child's notebook. 9 entries that documented the death of her entire family. 9 entries that became a monument to a million souls. Only Tanya is left, she wrote, but she was wrong. We are all left to remember, left to bear witness, left to make sure that 872 days of hell are never forgotten, never repeated, never dismissed as just another statistic in history's ledger. The Siege of Leningrad was the most terrible incident of World War II because it showed us exactly how far human cruelty could go and exactly how far human endurance could reach in response. Both lessons are worth remembering, both are worth teaching, both are worth the tears they cost us to learn.